Have you ever noticed how the things we can't explain tend to capture our attention more than the things we already understand? It's almost like the human mind is wired to chase unanswered questions. We see a puzzle, and we feel compelled to solve it. That's exactly what happened here. For years, people watched, listened, analyzed, and debated, trying to answer one surprisingly simple question: where is she really from? At first, it seemed like something that shouldn't matter very much. After all, talent is talent, character is character, and achievements speak for themselves. But uncertainty has a way of growing. Every interview sparked fresh speculation. Every public appearance generated another wave of theories. Some people were convinced they had already figured it out, while others challenged every assumption. Social media became a battlefield of opinions, with thousands of people confidently presenting completely different conclusions. What's fascinating isn't just the mystery itself, it's what the mystery revealed about us. We often believe we can identify someone's story from the way they speak, the way they look, or the places they've lived. We build mental shortcuts because our brains are designed to recognize patterns. Most of the time, those patterns help us navigate the world. But sometimes they lead us in the wrong direction, and when that happens, the confidence behind our assumptions can be surprisingly strong. The more people searched for answers, the bigger the mystery became. Tiny details that normally would have gone unnoticed suddenly became major clues. A single word in an interview, a childhood photograph, an old document, a passing comment. Everything was examined as though it held the final piece of the puzzle. Entire communities formed around connecting these fragments, convinced that the truth was just one discovery away. What made this story so compelling wasn't simply curiosity, it was the challenge. Humans are naturally drawn toward solving problems that appear impossible. Whether it's building reusable rockets, creating artificial intelligence, or exploring distant planets, progress has always started with a question that refused to go away. The unknown has an incredible ability to inspire effort, creativity, and persistence. But here's the interesting part. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to finding the truth isn't a lack of information. It's the stories we've already convinced ourselves are true. Once an idea becomes popular, it gains momentum, and people begin searching for evidence that supports what they already believe instead of remaining open to new possibilities. That's why this mystery lasted so long. It wasn't hidden because the truth was impossible to find. It remained hidden because expectations became louder than evidence. And when that happens, even the most obvious answers can stay invisible for years. The moment the truth finally emerged, it didn't just answer a question, it challenged the way we think about certainty itself. Once the mystery had everyone's attention, something remarkable began to happen. People started looking more closely. They replayed interviews, examined old photographs, revisited public appearances, and searched for anything that might reveal the truth. The assumption was simple. If the answer had been hidden for so long, then the clues must have been incredibly well concealed. But what if the opposite was true? What if the clues had been visible all along, and we simply failed to recognize them? That possibility is more common than most people realize. We don't just observe the world, we interpret it. Every piece of information passes through our expectations before we decide what it means. If we already believe a certain story, our minds naturally fit new details into that story instead of questioning it. It's an efficient way to process information, but it can also blind us to reality. Think about the conversations people had. Some pointed to the way she pronounced certain words. Others focused on expressions she used naturally, claiming they belonged to one culture or another. A few noticed small habits, gestures, or traditions that seemed to hint at a particular background. Each observation sounded convincing on its own. The problem was that people weren't looking at the complete picture. They were selecting the pieces that supported their favorite theory while quietly ignoring everything that didn't. Even the smallest details became larger than life. A brief childhood memory mentioned during an interview suddenly became evidence. A family photograph taken years earlier was analyzed from every possible angle. Places she had lived were mistaken for places she had come from. Languages she spoke fluently were assumed to be her native language. Every new clue seemed to answer one question while creating three more. What's truly fascinating is that none of these clues were meaningless. They all contained fragments of the truth. The mistake wasn't in noticing them. The mistake was assuming that one fragment represented the entire story. Reality is rarely that simple. Human lives are layered. People move, adapt, learn new cultures, and build identities that don't fit neatly into a single category. Innovation follows the same principle. If you're trying to solve a difficult problem, Focusing on one data point almost always leads to the wrong conclusion. You have to step back and examine the entire system. The breakthrough doesn't come from collecting more clues, it comes from understanding how those clues connect. That's exactly what everyone had been missing. The evidence wasn't scattered because it was meant to deceive anyone. It appeared confusing because people were trying to force it into a narrative that never truly fit. Once the assumptions began to fall away, the pattern became surprisingly clear. Sometimes the greatest discoveries don't come from finding something new. They come from seeing what has been in front of us all along with a completely different perspective. And the moment that perspective changes, the impossible suddenly becomes obvious. After all the speculation, endless debates, and countless attempts to connect the dots, there came a moment when the uncertainty finally gave way to clarity. It wasn't loud, it wasn't wrapped in dramatic fanfare. It was simply the point where the available evidence aligned, the facts became consistent, and the mystery that had fascinated so many people could no longer sustain itself. The interesting part is that the revelation didn't surprise everyone for the same reason. Some people were shocked because it contradicted what they had believed for years. Others were surprised because they had never questioned the popular narrative in the first place. And then there were those who realized that the answer itself wasn't nearly as extraordinary as the journey it took to uncover it. When her country was finally revealed, the immediate reaction wasn't just disbelief, it was reflection. People went back through old interviews, photographs, public appearances, and conversations. Suddenly, details that had once seemed confusing began to make sense. Pieces that looked unrelated now fit together naturally. It was like watching the final piece of a complex puzzle click into place. Nothing had changed about the facts themselves. What changed was the framework through which people understood them. This is something that happens far beyond a single story. Throughout history, major breakthroughs have often appeared obvious only after they were understood. Before that moment, the evidence can seem disconnected, even contradictory. But once the underlying pattern becomes visible, people often wonder how they missed it in the first place. That's one of the most valuable lessons about discovering truth. Truth doesn't depend on popularity. It doesn't become stronger because more people agree with it. And it doesn't become weaker because most people misunderstand it. Reality simply waits to be recognized. It's also worth considering why the revelation felt so powerful. It challenged assumptions that had become deeply rooted. People had built narratives, repeated them, and reinforced them over time. Once those narratives encountered solid evidence, they had to be reconsidered. That process isn't always comfortable, but it's essential for growth. Progress, whether in science, technology, or our understanding of people, depends on the willingness to replace confident assumptions with better information. And perhaps that's the real significance of this moment. It isn't about proving that one group was right and another was wrong. It's about demonstrating the importance of intellectual flexibility. The ability to update your thinking when new evidence appears is one of the most powerful skills anyone can develop. The mystery may have ended with the revelation of her country, but in many ways, that was only the beginning. Because once the truth was finally visible, a much deeper question emerged. What else have we accepted as fact simply because we've heard it often enough? The greatest breakthroughs begin the moment we're willing to let evidence speak louder than expectation. Now that the mystery has been resolved, it's worth asking a much more meaningful question. Why does her country of origin matter at all? Is it simply an interesting fact to satisfy curiosity, or does it tell us something deeper about the person behind the story? The answer lies somewhere in between. Knowing where someone comes from doesn't define their future, but it often helps us understand the path they traveled to get there. Every country leaves its mark on the people who grow up within it. Culture shapes the way we communicate, the values we're taught, the traditions we celebrate, and even the problems we're expected to solve. It influences how we see opportunity, how we respond to failure, and how we measure success. That doesn't mean everyone from the same place is identical. Far from it. But the environment in which a person begins life creates a unique foundation that stays with them, even as they evolve. When people didn't know her true origin, they filled the gaps with assumptions. They interpreted her confidence through one cultural lens, her communication style through another, and her achievements through yet another. Once the truth became clear, many of those interpretations shifted. Actions that once seemed unusual suddenly made perfect sense. Habits that had puzzled observers were no longer mysteries. Her story gained context, and with context came understanding. This is an important reminder that context changes everything. If you look at a single data point in isolation, it's easy to reach the wrong conclusion. But when you understand the environment from which that data emerged, patterns begin to appear. The same principle applies whether you're studying human behavior, designing advanced technology, or trying to solve a global challenge. Context transforms information into insight. There's another lesson hidden here as well. We often celebrate the destination without appreciating the journey. We admire success without asking what experiences shaped the person who achieved it. We see confidence without recognizing the obstacles that built it. We notice accomplishments without understanding the culture, family, education, and challenges that quietly contributed to them over many years. At the same time, we should be careful not to let nationality become a label that limits our perception. A person's country is one chapter of their story, not the entire book. Human potential has never respected borders. Great ideas don't require passports. Innovation doesn't belong to one nation, one language, or one culture. It belongs to anyone willing to ask difficult questions and work relentlessly toward meaningful answers. Perhaps that's the greatest value of finally knowing where she comes from. It doesn't place her inside a box. It helps remove the boxes that others had built around her. Instead of relying on assumptions, people can now appreciate her journey with greater honesty and respect, because in the end, understanding someone's origins should never reduce who they are. It should deepen our appreciation for how far they have traveled to become who they are today. Once the revelation became public, something almost as fascinating as the mystery itself began to unfold. The conversation shifted from "where is she really from?" to "how did we get this so wrong?" That change is important because it transformed the focus from speculation to reflection. The answer was finally available, but the reaction to that answer revealed just as much about people as the mystery ever did. Some embraced the revelation immediately. They welcomed the facts, appreciated the clarity, and moved on. For them, the truth was simply the next step in understanding the story. Others responded with genuine surprise. They had spent so much time believing a different version that accepting the new reality required them to rethink years of assumptions. That's not always easy. The human mind naturally prefers consistency, even when the evidence points somewhere else. Then there were those who remained skeptical. They questioned every detail, revisited old arguments, and searched for reasons to defend the conclusions they had already reached. This isn't unusual. Throughout history, every significant discovery has encountered resistance. New information often competes with familiar beliefs, and familiar beliefs tend to feel more comfortable than uncomfortable truths. What stood out most, however, wasn't disagreement, it was the speed at which information traveled. Within hours, discussions spread across social platforms, news outlets, online communities, and private conversations. Millions of people who had never met her suddenly had an opinion about her story. Some celebrated the revelation as a victory for facts. Others treated it as entertainment. A few used it as an opportunity to revisit older debates. In today's connected world, a single piece of verified information can circle the globe in moments, carrying with it countless interpretations. That's both an incredible strength and a serious responsibility. Technology has given humanity the ability to share knowledge faster than ever before. But speed doesn't automatically create understanding. Information moves instantly. Wisdom takes time. If we react before we think, we risk amplifying confusion instead of clarity. What's encouraging is that many people did something different. Rather than arguing louder, they became more curious. They asked better questions. They revisited the evidence with fresh eyes. They acknowledged that their earlier assumptions had been incomplete. That willingness to learn is one of the most valuable qualities any society can develop. Progress doesn't come from never being wrong. It comes from recognizing when we're wrong and choosing to improve our understanding. In many ways, the public reaction became a mirror. It reflected our habits, our biases, our curiosity, and our capacity to grow. Some saw confirmation of what they already believed. Others saw an opportunity to rethink their perspective. Both reactions were part of the story, but only one leads to progress. Because the measure of intelligence isn't how confidently we defend yesterday's assumptions, it's how willingly we embrace tomorrow's evidence. As we reach the end of this story, it's worth remembering that the country itself was never the most important part of the journey. The real value was in what the journey exposed about the way we think, the way we judge, and the way we search for truth. A mystery that began with a simple question ultimately became a lesson about human nature. It's surprisingly easy to mistake confidence for certainty. We hear an idea repeated enough times, and it begins to feel like a fact. We see enough people agree with a conclusion, and we assume the conclusion must be correct. But reality doesn't operate on popularity, it operates on evidence. The universe has never changed its rules because a majority voted for a different answer. Whether we're exploring space, building new technologies, or trying to understand another person, the truth remains the truth, regardless of what we expect it to be. That's why curiosity is so powerful. Curiosity keeps us from becoming trapped by our own assumptions. It encourages us to ask one more question, to verify one more claim, to look at one more piece of evidence before reaching a conclusion. The greatest discoveries in history didn't happen because someone accepted the obvious explanation. They happened because someone was willing to challenge it. There's another lesson that deserves attention. People are far more complex than the labels we give them. Nationality, language, appearance, profession, or background can tell us something about a person, but none of those things tells us everything. Human beings are shaped by countless experiences, relationships, challenges, failures, and choices. Reducing someone to a single characteristic doesn't make the world easier to understand. It makes it less accurate. The same mindset applies to solving big problems. Whether we're working to create sustainable energy, expand human knowledge, or build technologies that improve life, breakthroughs rarely come from looking at the world through narrow categories. They come from connecting ideas that others believed didn't belong together. Innovation begins where assumptions end. This story also reminds us that changing your mind is not a weakness. In many cases, it's a sign of intellectual strength. The willingness to update your beliefs when better evidence appears is one of the foundations of meaningful progress. Every scientific advancement, every engineering breakthrough, and every great discovery has depended on people who cared more about being accurate than about being right. Imagine what becomes possible if we apply that principle not just to famous stories, but to everyday life. Imagine approaching conversations with genuine curiosity instead of instant judgment. Imagine evaluating ideas based on evidence instead of expectations. Imagine building a culture where asking thoughtful questions is valued more than pretending to have immediate answers. The mystery may be over, but the opportunity it creates is just beginning. Every assumption we challenge, every fact we verify, and every perspective we expand brings us one step closer to understanding not only the world around us, but also the incredible potential within ourselves. Because the future will always belong to those who have the courage to question what everyone else is too comfortable to believe.